Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got him. On the evening of September 11th, a family member of Tyler Robinson reached out to a family friend who contacted the Washington County Sheriff's Office with information that Robinson had confessed to them or implied that he had committed the incident. This information was relayed to the Utah County Sheriff's Office and scene investigators at Utah Valley University. This information was also conveyed to the FBI. Investigators reviewed additional video footage from UVU surveillance and identified Robinson arriving on UVU campus in a gray Dodge Challenger at approximately 8:29 a.m. on September 10th, in which he is observed on video in a plain maroon t-shirt, light-colored shorts, a black hat with a white logo, and light-colored shoes. When encountered in person by investigators in Washington County on September 12th in the early morning hours, Robinson was observed in consistent clothing with those surveillance images.
We officially have a suspect in custody. It was actually first announced by President Trump on the Fox News channel, and then subsequently the Utah police and the FBI did like a joint press conference where they said that 22-year-old Tyler Robinson is the man who pulled the trigger in the assassination of one Charlie Kirk. Now, of course, there was a lot of speculation about this shooter prior to him actually being captured. We're going to touch on that in just a little bit, but I do want to point out that, of course, now that this man is in fact captured, the delving into his history and labeling him has officially commenced. And wouldn't you know it, wouldn't you not be surprised at all if I told you that the left wing has already decided to blame you for this because this individual apparently came from a Republican family. Now, of course, conveniently left out and oftentimes lied about when it comes to this individual is the fact that he was specifically registered unaffiliated. It's also left out that his family, including his father specifically, are the ones who restrained him and turned him into authorities. But apparently it's your fault that Charlie Kirk was killed, and you should just ignore the fact that over the past couple of days, major swaths of the left wing have been defaming him, justifying his murder, and outright celebrating it. It's absolutely disgusting. It's absolutely heinous. And the thing is, I actually predicted that there was a chance that we were going to get ambiguous and or misleading signs about this particular shooter in the lead up to this in a previous video. While it seems pretty obvious what the motivations are, while the recent indications of what was carved into the magazines and into this guy's weapons seem to indicate that obviously it was from a left-wing perspective, specifically targeting Charlie Kirk for alleged fascism, which again, the absurdity of shooting somebody who was under a banner that said, hey, come and talk to me, prove me wrong in order to stop fascism is obviously not lost upon me. While obviously there are the trans's indications on these particular magazines, I do still say that we should reserve judgment, at least in part, until we actually have a positive ID on this person, because it's not like it's unusual for people to, try to throw you off, try to change up what their motivation is as a mechanism in order to, create chaos in the country. So yeah, we leave that possibility open. And again, one of the only reasons I say that is because from my experience as somebody on this side of the camera, very often, while you do get threats from your enemies, while you do get targeted from your enemies, there are certain situations where people who like you or people who love you or people who are on board with your cause end up doing far more harm and seem far more dangerous than those that are opposed to you. So I just want to put that out there that is a possibility. Now look, I'm not saying I was 100% right on this. In fact, I was just giving the necessary caveats based on the fact that we've seen a lot of this nonsense before, and of course based on the idea that I know, being on this side of the camera, that sometimes it's not even people that are against you, that hate you, that can be the biggest threats. It can be somebody who actually loves you. However, that does not appear to be the case in this particular instance. And despite what you're hearing from major swaths of the left-wing media, despite the misinformation, disinformation, and outright lies related to this particular case, in my opinion, we are basically at square one with this individual, because he does does have signs and things that were written on the bullet that could go in a couple of different directions. However, overall, the fact that he decided to shoot Charlie Kirk, and of course, the messaging that we're getting from the family about how much he hated Charlie Kirk, not for being controlled by the Jews or anything that a fringe right person would hate him for, but because he apparently was hateful and he spread hateful words, it still seems like more likely than not, this person had a couple of left-wing inclinations, despite what the mainstream media is putting forward against us. And again, I will highlight the things that they're clinging to are a 2017 photo of him that they describe as him dressing as President Trump. However, he is clearly on the shoulders of President Trump. This could easily be interpreted as him riding on top of him as a way to degrade and to mock President Trump. And in addition to that, this was back in 2017. That is a long time from now. We're talking about 8 years ago. Also, I will point out that we have other countervailing information that is being brought forward by, of course, the Utah governor, the Utah police, and the FBI. So let's get into that a little bit because there's some engravings on the bullets, and I have basically gone into the rabbit hole in order to try to get an interpretation for this.
Area with trees on the edge of the UVU campus. Investigators discovered a bolt-action rifle wrapped in a dark-colored towel. The rifle was determined to be a Mauser Model 98 30-06 caliber bolt-action rifle. The rifle had a scope mounted on top of it. Investigators noted inscriptions that had been engraved on casings found with the rifle. Inscriptions on a fired casing read, "Notices, bulges, capital OWO, what's this, question mark." Inscriptions on the 3 unfired casings read, "Hey fascist, exclamation point, catch, exclamation point." Up arrow symbol, right arrow and symbol, and 3 down arrow symbols. A second unfired casing read, "Oh Bella Chow, Bella Chow, Bella Chow, Chow Chow." And a third unfired casing read, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO."
So on the bullets, we had notices, bulges, oh whoa, what's this, hey fascist, catch, up arrow, right arrow, 3 down arrows, oh Bella cow, cow, cow. If you read this, you are gay. Now again, as predicted in a previous video, it is not unusual for these types of shooters to leave ambiguous messages on their bullets, on their guns, in order to draw more attention to themselves. But we actually have an interpretation of each and every one of these posts that I think is absolutely crucial to get into, because even I didn't understand them, and that is because I'm not a gamer, because one of the ones that seemed like it was the most obvious to me is actually a reference to a game called Helldivers that honestly I don't know anything about. So let's get into this from the top. So apparently the notices, bulges, oh whoa, what's this, is a parody of furries on the internet, and apparently it's what's called a copy pasta. The second one is a reference to calling an airstrike in the massively popular online multiplayer game Helldivers. The other one seems to be referring to an Italian song dedicated to anti-Nazi partisans, and the fourth one is widely considered to be just a troll joke. And again, the ambiguity of this, the young people references of this, has led people to say on the mainstream media that he's just a regular ordinary Republican because they have no idea what this stuff means, but it's led some on the internet.com to say that this individual happens to be a member of the Groypers or is Groyper adjacent or something of the sort, and there's like a couple of photos that they posted that supposedly indicate this kind of affiliation. Now again, while each and every one of these are very likely internet references, it seems like the third one, which is a reference to an Italian anti-Nazi song, doesn't really have an internet reference to be utilized in order to explain it as something that a Groyper would throw out, unless that's changed at the time that after I publish this video or something, then, that seems to be where it is. So who knows, based on these shell casings, what this individual actually believed. So what else do we look to in order to get this determination? Well, apparently there's a more recent photo from his Instagram or from his Facebook where he's wearing a vest and a mask, like a COVID mask, and he has some LGBT flags on said vest. A lot of people are glomming onto this, but honestly, I question any photo where I can't clearly see an individual's face. In addition to that, we also have the people that are just trying to say, look at all the photos of him growing up with guns, as if that's unusual in the state of Utah when you have Republican parents. But the thing that really stuck stuck out to me, and again, it could be my own personal bias, take it with a grain of salt if you want, is the fact that apparently he had conversations with his roommate and he had conversations with members of his family about Charlie Kirk coming to Utah and how Charlie Kirk was specifically hateful.
Investigators interviewed a family member of Robinson who stated that Robinson had become more political in recent years. The family member referenced a recent incident in which Robinson came to dinner prior to September 10th, and in the conversation with another family member, Robinson mentioned Charlie Kirk was coming to UVU. They talked about why they didn't like him and the viewpoints that he had. The family member also stated Kirk was full of hate and spreading hate. The family member also confirmed Robinson had a gray Dodge Challenger.
And make no mistake about it, even though many people in the Groypers did not like Charlie Kirk up until the moment that he got shot, they called him a sellout to the Jews and all sorts of things, a shill for Israel, all the things that you're familiar with. The fact is, they would not describe him, in my humble opinion, as a hateful individual. That seems to be a very left-wing adjective, so it is entirely possible that this guy could have been a Groyper at one time. He could be a Groyper now. He could have been a Republican like his parents while he was growing up. But once he got to university, once he actually lived in that particular forum, he ended up radicalizing in the other direction. Again, we're trying to attach specific political ideologies to people who shoot people with guns, and of course, people who obviously are young and are prone to changing those ideologies. So we don't know as of right now. However, I still will say, based on the fact that we have family members talking about why he disliked Charlie Kirk, which is absolutely crucial, and that reason being because Charlie Kirk is saying hateful things, he is doing bigoted things, is the implication of that. That seems to be a left-wing worldview of Charlie Kirk. And again, hidden in the third casing is a message that, again, harkens to a anti-Nazi song, and a lot of the time people tend to label people like Charlie Kirk, like President Trump, like all of his supporters and advocates, to be Nazis. So this apparently looks like it's something, but as of right now, we're just going to have to wait for more information. Also, again, I give credit to everybody who was talking about how we shouldn't necessarily trust the interpretation of the arrows thing as a transit thing, because apparently that was a video game reference. Now, to be clear, we also understand that Luigi Mangione very famously put certain things on his shell casings in order to communicate a message, so there is a copycat element from that involved in this particular case. We've seen engravings on firearms and other things since Mangione, but the casings with the messaging appears to be something to be likened to Mangione himself. And I got a lot of crap on this channel, by the way, for calling out Mangione in no uncertain terms, calling the people who supported or made excuses for him killing an innocent man on the streets of Manhattan by shooting him in the back, the monsters that they actually are. And again, it's possible in some sick way this guy could have taken inspiration from the Mangione shooting, whether he agreed with him politically or not. Now look, while the ideology of the shooter 100% does matter, it is important. It's important for us to understand what radicalized this individual, who apparently had a 4.0 and a perfect ACT score, in order to do something this horrific. There's only one group that's actually celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and that is unambiguously broad swaths of the left. Now, there are notable exceptions. There are people like Cenk Uygur and Ana Kasparian, who I just criticized for spreading crazy conspiracies in a different category, unambiguously condemn this, but you have a bunch of different various people trying to smear Charlie Kirk after he's dead, trying to make excuses for their hatred of Charlie Kirk, and a bunch of people that are just openly celebrating his death, selling merchandise about it, and all of that. So again, regardless of what the shooter believed, the people who support that action happen to be unanimously on the left, and that's absolutely disgusting. And that's not to say that there isn't political violence coming from the right and you shouldn't call it out when it's coming from the right, but the thing is, I find it to be incredibly insincere that these people who didn't talk about, let's say, the Minnesota state representatives getting killed 2 months ago for the entire past 2 months, to suddenly bring that up in order to throw in the faces of people in response to Charlie Kirk being killed as just a mechanism in order to condemn those who are upset about Charlie Kirk. And make no mistake about it, that was an unambiguous act of evil. We called it out at the time on this channel. I called it exactly for what it was, because even though that guy worked for Tim Walz on some committee among the thousands of appointments that he had, and that caused a lot of people to say that he was a leftist, it seemed like, based on his writings and based on his list of almost every prominent Democrat in the state of Minnesota, that he was obviously somebody who had an axe to grind against Democrats, and that's absolutely awful. So yeah, we called that out over here. I did personally. I have absolutely no shame nor no guilt related to that, because I understand the gravity of political assassinations. But for the people who never call out violence from the left wing and oftentimes excuse and cheer it on or deny it, to suddenly try to bring that up to throw it in people's faces, we know what you're doing. We know you're being absolutely insincere. In addition to that, I also think it's important to call out every single person who's pushing the idea that this guy was some kind of professional because he hadn't been caught in like 30 hours or 40 hours from the time of the shooting. This was ridiculous. This was absurd. And the reason why is because there was nothing to indicate that this guy was anything but lucky. And in fact, we already went through this with Luigi Mangione, who was on the run for 5 days, much longer than this guy who was caught in the second day that he was on the run. So yeah, we should have a little bit more perspective about the nonsense that is being put forward related to all these conspiracies around who the shooter was. Now, if you followed me on X over the past couple of days, then you've heard these arguments before, but for those of you who haven't, let me explain to you how absurd it was for people to just assume that this was a professional assassin because he fired one shot that hit Mr. Kirk in the neck, and of course he was able to elude capture. So let's be clear about this, because a lot of people are making the comparison to the attempted Trump assassin from on July 13th of 2024, even though there are key differences that are absolutely crucial. So the first major difference is that unlike the Trump attempted assassin, this guy had a bolt action rifle, not a semi-automatic rifle like an AR-15. So unlike that guy who could just pull the trigger multiple times and bullets would fly out, you actually have to disengage it with the bolt thingy, which maybe I'll put a graphic on because I'm not describing it very well, in order to manually remove the previous cartridge and install the other one prior to firing. In addition to that, bolt action rifles appear to be significantly more accurate due to the fact that the bullet has less like wiggle room when you initially fire it because it's closer up in the thing. And yes, I'm not a gun expert. I watched a video explaining this. I'll link a video explaining this in the description of the video. So the idea that this guy, who presumably had never killed another human being before, would have the fortitude to stay there and then re-rack and actually go through that whole process rather than flee after firing a shot, to me, was just always a stupid assumption. In addition to that, you had a lot of people at the Kirk event, a lot of people panicking, a lot of people running, so using the chaos as a mechanism to escape, not surprising at all whatsoever. In addition to that, we have Ring video doorbell footage from him walking to the scene, and it appears that this so-called professional had the rifle stuffed in his pants because he was walking with a limp to the scene and walking without a limp from the scene, and apparently ditched his firearm. Also, we're not factoring in that the Trump assassin was actually discovered right before firing and decided to fire immediately, if you guys will recall, after being caught by a cop who climbed up a ladder, while this guy wasn't discovered until way later on video footage where people happened to catch that particular roof. Also, we're not factoring in the element of luck, because there's a lot of hay being made about an older individual who was detained at the scene, and it turns out that that's one of those guys, and if you do live events on this side of the camera, you know them for sure, that shows up to multiple different events in order to make a disturbance, and he's essentially like the equivalent of the political version of the homeless guy that stands in front of 7-Eleven that's always yelling on about something else. So of course, this guy, in an effort to be a troll, because that's who he is, maybe he has a pre-existing mental condition, who knows, ends up getting himself detained, and there were only 6 Utah police officers at the scene at the time. So if you have a bunch of them escorting this individual, they're not out searching for the particular shooter. In addition to that, we had a description relatively early on of the shooter's clothing related to this particular instance, and it appears the other individual who was detained happened to be wearing a black shirt, a ball cap, and of course jeans at the time. So a lot of people are like, oh, there were 2 patsies set up for the fall of this, but in reality, it seems like they detained one guy who was making a disturbance and another individual at a certain point in time that matched the clothing description of our suspect. Now, while I have very little tolerance for conspiracies because I find it to be a thing that people are utilizing in order to kind of profit off of this tragedy, I will point out that in the footage of the guy dropping down from the roof, it does not appear as if we can see the firearm at that moment in time. However, it could be back in his pant leg or something of the sort. We just don't know right now, and we should have that explained because apparently he ditched it in the bushes or in the wooded area right after he crossed the street, which sounds weird, but you do have to understand and factor in that criminals don't often make the most logical choices, but presumably it would be a question of why would you ditch it over there instead of just leaving it on the roof. Also, apparently we have a Discord message of him trying to ask his friend to pick up that weapon. That's insane. That's ridiculous if true, but again, we will find out that information later on as things come more to the public view. Also, professionals don't typically aim for the neck. Anybody who's actually seen the video, which will not be linked in the description, knows that's where Charlie Kirk was hit, so it is entirely possible that this guy who is firing a very accurate rifle at not that great of a distance was actually aiming for his chest, and unfortunately for Kirk, he ended up getting hit in the neck in an absolutely crucial place where he could not recover from that wound. So yeah, again, a lot of people are trying to draw conclusions after the fact. They're doing the post-diction thing. I find that to be absurd. Again, you can have your conspiracies, but maybe let's try to actually catch the guy instead of blaming this person or that person. And in that same vein, I do think it's important, even though, again, I didn't want to talk about this, even though I saw this prior to this guy getting caught, but the idea that you would look at this particular instance, you would observe the video of Charlie Kirk being murdered, you would look at all of his friends in the media and all the people around the world that are holding vigils for Charlie Kirk and think to yourself, now's a good time for me to go after Ben Shapiro, like a lot of people on the internet were. I don't even fathom your lack of moral character. The idea that you would try to settle a personal score or a score because Ben Shapiro is Jewish, who, by the way, was a friend of Charlie Kirk, is insane and asinine. And I really genuinely think that everybody should examine the content creators that they follow and ask themselves if they're worthy of being followed, if they were spreading the rumor that Ben Shapiro was somehow responsible for Kirk's killing so he could take over Turning Point USA. And by the way, what they based this on was a clip of Ben saying, we're going to pick up that mic and we're going to do public events. We're never going to stop speaking out in public as a way to honor Charlie Kirk, which, by the way, is a sentiment that was expressed by multiple people that were friends of his that were in the media. So yeah, it's disgusting. It's ridiculous. It's all the more disgusting in that Ben and Charlie were apparently pretty good friends. But again, more importantly, if you thought this was your opportunity to settle the score with Ben Shapiro of all places, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you, and I will not be trusting you going forward. Again, this isn't about overpraising Ben or anything of the sort. I have my issues with the guy, but this is a bridge too far. That being said, this is the information we know right now. Those are my thoughts on all of said information. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. And of course, I will remind you guys that now that we've gotten the shooter, we pursue justice against the shooter, and we don't lash out against other individuals or anything of the sort. Again, keep yourself calm, relax. They're waiting for you to react. Do not do so. Don't do anything stupid. Don't do anything crazy. Don't do anything violent. Engage in the battlefield of ideas if you want to honor Charlie Kirk, because that's exactly what he did. Believe me, I witnessed one of the greatest fears that every content creator has inflicted upon Charlie Kirk. It devastated me, and I didn't even know the guy. I understand how you feel more so. I'm significantly worried. Everybody I know is worried. I have friends that were really close to him that still aren't able to talk about this at this moment in time. So don't make an ass of yourself and make things worse by doing something horrible. We are going to call out the evil that was inflicted upon Charlie Kirk. We're going to call out the evil that has had people cheering on Charlie Kirk, and every single one of those people will be named and shamed publicly, but we are not going to take up the same tactics of those who want to silence us. We are not in any way, shape, or form are going to pick up weapons happens and start targeting random individuals and go into the mud like this absolute son of a bitch coward did. Again, the fact that this guy is a 22-year-old male, high IQ apparently according to his scores, and somebody that Charlie Kirk wanted to reach makes this all the more tragic, makes this all the more embarrassing, and makes him all the more weak of an individual. You're this smart guy, you do well on your standardized tests, but you can't talk to a guy who's providing an open forum. You have to hide 180 yards away and fire a shot upon him with a high-powered rifle. Weakness personified. Do not in any way, shape, or form emulate that weakness. Emulate the strength of Charlie Kirk, because you know what? A lot of people are going to tell you that Charlie Kirk's voice is getting stronger. And you know what? In a lot of regards, that is true. People are going to remember him. People are going to promote his ideas. People are going to be encouraged to speak out about their ideas in public. But in reality, Charlie Kirk's organizational skills are much harder to find. We took a blow. So look, I'm not telling you to forget about Charlie Kirk. I'm not downplaying the absolutely devastating loss that his life being taken at such a young age is for the movement. What I am asking you to do is not dishonor him. Don't dishonor his memory. Don't dishonor his legacy. Don't dishonor his family. Don't dishonor his friends. Don't dishonor all the different various people that were inspired by him that are doing candlelight vigils around the world. Because in reality, even though Tyler Robinson had the power and he used the power to kill Charlie Kirk, it is up to us to prevent Charlie Kirk from being destroyed. So yeah, that's all I really have for you guys today. And as I've said in the last couple of videos I've done on this subject matter, if you want to do something positive, then reach out to Charlie Kirk's wife and send her your love and support. Reach out to Charlie Kirk's friends. They recently redid his show, or did another episode of the Charlie Kirk show with an empty chair, and you know that all of those people are hurting. And by the way, you don't need to look far to find people in conservative media that were friends of Kirk. Like I said, I didn't know him personally. Obviously, the loss is devastating for everybody that I know that did know him personally. So again, even if you're taking shots in the dark, reaching out to people and checking if they're okay, chances are you will actually, like hit somebody that was impacted by Charlie Kirk or helped by him in some way, shape, or form. As usual, the YouTube stuff. I'm going to leave it here. Later.